E-L-O-E-J, a little aloha in our day. Spread a little aloha around the world. At breakfast with Bob.
Thank you, Poncho Man. Welcome everybody back to Breakfast with Bob. My name is Bob Babbitt. We're brought to you by Hoka One One by Master Spas, Clash Endurance UCAN, Hyper Ice, Premium Plus Sports, Form Smart Swim Goggles, and of course our Challenge Athletes Foundation. We just sent out 3,038 grants totaling $5.1 million keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. Two of my favorite people on the planet from totally different worlds, but they have collided to work together on Any Question. Ed Baker is the founder and CEO of Any Question. And of course, Mr. Greg Bennett, one of the greatest triathletes in the history of the planet, 2004 Olympian. In 2007, had one of the greatest seasons ever, winning all of the city marathons and winning, $500,000 in 1 year. How both of you guys doing? Ed, let's start with you. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Bob. Thanks so much for having us today.
So you, for years, obviously, you with your background in from Harvard, it certainly didn't spell out that you were going to be an investment guy, right? We're talking. You're talking chemistry and
chemistry and physics.
Yeah, physics. So take us through from that at Harvard to going to Stanford, MBA, and then ending up, Facebook and Uber and everything else you've accomplished.
Sure. So I studied physics and chemistry in college. I also ran cross country and track while I was there. So that was kind of, I come from an endurance sports background, which ultimately led me to triathlon many years later. And the other thing I did in college was I built my first website, a site called datesite.com, where it was basically a crush site where you could say who you had a crush on. And if they said they had a crush on you, it would match you up. So kind of like Tinder, but back in 1999 with email.
You were ahead of the game.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I don't know. Within 1 week, a quarter of the students at Harvard had signed up for it. So, but maybe that tells you something about Harvard students. I don't know. So anyway, I didn't really think I would become an investor, but I did think after building DateSite that building companies was a really exciting thing to do. And even though I can't call the little project I worked on in college a company, I think it did give me a taste of that entrepreneurial bug. So when I then went out to Stanford for business school out in Silicon Valley, I was in the middle of, the place where there's so many people starting companies. And so I decided to start my first one right out of business school.
Friendly?
Friendly, that's right. So Friendly was we called it a social discovery site, a place where you could meet new people and make new friends. It grew to about 25 million users, and then we sold the company to Facebook.
And so you go from, you're with Facebook, and then you end up from Facebook, Uber, and then down the line, Lime, and then Any Question. Now, in the meantime, what blows me away as an amateur triathlete, I think it was 2018. It wasn't that long.
That's right.
First Ironman, you go, 9:18 at Ironman Lake Placid, and then go, that's not good enough. A month later, you go 8:27 at Copenhagen. You're a crazy man who dives into things full on. So there's your passion is sport. You have 2:21 marathon PR as well. Now with Any Question, you're taking your hobby, your passion of endurance sports, and creating another app that goes along that's basically different from the stuff you've done in the past. Now they're connected.
That's right. And so, I told myself, if I ever started another company, it would have to be something I was personally very passionate about myself. And, I was fortunate to have the last 4 years pretty much was a break from work. I did do some investing in companies like Lime and Whoop and Zwift and some others, Form swim goggles as well.
Form, yes.
Yep. So
our favorite.
And Super Sapiens and Morton. And so, I was investing in a lot of these companies that were in the health and wellness space. But then I finally had this idea that I couldn't stop thinking about. And I just decided I need to build this thing. And I actually had the idea when I was listening to Greg Bennett's podcast, listening to him interviews the best, athletes in the world. And it occurred to me, just like you do and like Greg does, when you talk to the best people in the world and ask them questions, you learn a lot. And so that's when the idea kind of went off in my head, which was, why isn't there a way for all of us to be able to ask questions, not just the host of a podcast?
You're stealing our thunder. What the hell are you doing?
I know, that's right.
We'll be out of business soon, Bob.
So Greggy, take me from there, how you guys connected and decided, hey, this is something both of us can be involved with.
Well, actually, it's kind of a fun story. Laura came home from the playground with the kids one day and said, I've met this amazing woman. She's got a cousin that she says you should have on your podcast. And everybody's got a cousin, right? Everybody's got a cousin that should be on the podcast.
Yeah.
But I did look him up and I was like, oh, this guy, Ed Baker, interesting guy. I put him on my list, of possibilities. And it was probably about a month later, I get this support through my Patreon page, where, Patreon's where they can kind of support you if they want to. And this guy, Ed Baker, had signed up for my top level of support. And a part of that would be that I would, chat with him once a month. And it was about this time last year, actually. And just, it was amazing. He didn't know that Angela, his cousin, had spoken to my wife, Laura, in the playground. So our two worlds kind of collided there. The first time I had a really good conversation with him, I actually just brought him straight on the show. And so we had that first episode together. And then we just started sort of monthly, but I think it even accelerated more than that. I think we were probably chatting a little bit more than that, mainly because we just hit it off and we got along so much. But it was probably soon after he had that any question idea that he broached it with me. And I think I lit up. I just said, this is the future. And namely, the thing that excited me most was the fact that I was never one for coming up with ideas to post on Instagram or post to Twitter. I didn't want to be creative and have to come up with that stuff. But I never minded the idea of somebody asking me a question and all I got to do was answer it. That to me simplified the whole idea. And when Ed really took me through what he wanted, I was like, okay, this is fantastic. How can I be involved and how can I help? And that's it. That was probably about April, May this year.
So in terms of getting Jan Frodeno, Lucy Charles-Barclay, Javier Gomez, some of the bigger athletes to buy in, how hard was that?
It actually wasn't hard at all. Look, I'm coming from a place where those people that you mentioned are a lot of my friends, and it was reasonably easy conversation. And I know Ed's good friends with Jan Frodeno as well. And so, Jan has sort of come on more as he's taken ownership in the sense that he just loves what we're doing and he wants to see it work. Lucy Charles-Barclay was much the same. And the other athletes, they're excited about, it's funny. It's some of the great athletes are all aboard because that's their personality trait. They do anything they can to better themselves and be bigger. Maybe the lesser athletes haven't jumped in as much as you'd think they would. And it's been interesting for me to just see their personalities, the ones that are just like, I want to give this a go no matter what. And some of those names you mentioned, they're doing exactly that. They're on board. It's an early stage startup. We launched just over a month ago. This is really early. And so the big name experts that came on board, jumped 2 feet in and giving it a good crack. They realize that it's an early stage, but they're on board anyway. And we're excited to have them. It's amazing to have people like Nino Schurter and Kate Courtney from the mountain biking world. Yolanda Neff is on the site, the recent Olympic gold medalist for mountain biking. I mean, we have just in the 2 verticals that we've started with triathlon and mountain biking, we do have the best of the best. And the conversations we're having now with some of the world's greatest swimmers, the world's greatest chefs. It's not just endurance sports. We're going to slowly branch it out into other topics. So, it's exciting, the conversations we're having.
So Ed, you see this like a master class almost? This is that type of setup?
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, but I would say the biggest difference between what we're doing in masterclass is that this is interactive. So you're not just sitting back and watching a class on video. This is like if masterclass were to have office hours and Q&A with the instructor afterwards, and anyone can ask questions. And then everyone gets to hear the answers. So even though one person is asking a question, that answer is not just heard by the person who asked it, but it's heard by everyone. So that's also what makes it feel a bit more like listening to a podcast, for example.
Yeah. So one of the things that this is sort of a cool era when it comes to triathlon, Greg, when you look at what's happening with Super League and WTS and Ironman, and obviously
PTO.
Right now we have, Clash. You just did the TV show, the NBC show for Clash Daytona, and then the PTO and Collins Cup. And there seems to be a lot of money flowing into our sport, which is great. Mm-hmm. But we also saw that back in, with Hy-Vee and with Toyota and the Lifetime Fitness, when you won $500,000 in 2007, and that went away, right? Mm-hmm. we saw it go away. Are you concerned at all that this is sustainable? What we're seeing right now, the investment in our sport, a lot more TV, a lot more excitement, and obviously making our athletes bigger names helps what you guys are doing as well. Any question, people want to ask a question of somebody who's sort of a celebrity.
Yeah, I think to your first point of, is what's happening in triathlon sustainable? I don't think all the models are. You mentioned off a lot of different things that are going on. I did just have the CEO of the Professional Triathlete Organization, the PTO, Sam Renouf, on my podcast this week, and he was very patient in what they're trying to do. And, for them, they have Sir Michael Moritz, investment behind them. And a part of that investment is he's come on board and said, look, take your time, get it right. And I think that's a freedom that the PTO have above all the other things that you described that's going on in the sport, and money coming in from certain billionaires over here and here. I think the way that the PTO are trying to do it, to build it, to encourage broadcasting rather than revenue generation from age group entry fees, I think there's a lot of value there. And that to me, I left that conversation with Sam going, okay, I really believe this can be a sustainable one, because you're right, we've seen Lifetime Fitness there for the 7 years, and in Australia we had the Grand Prix series with all the different, and it's always this 7-year itch. Hy-Vee, 7 years. It's that 7-year itch seems to happen, not just in relationships but in sport and brands. But I do think I'm most excited about the PTO and what they're doing, and I think the others will benefit from that. When you talk Clash Endurance, Super League, and everybody else, I think they'll benefit from that. And then, is that answering your question? What else was there?
It is. I agree with you, because Mike Moritz, if you look at Strava, you look at Zwift, you look at and Ed understands this, you're in for long haul, right? It's something, as somebody who's been an investor for a long time, when you see what Mike Moritz is doing with PTO, what are your thoughts, Ed?
I think it's very interesting. And I agree with Greg's point that a lot of these things, you've got to think long-term, and, it takes time to build long-term sustainable companies. So you need investors like Mike Moritz, who's going to be patient and is thinking kind of over the long term. And mm-hmm. It's okay if the first year you don't, necessarily need to be making a profit or something like that. And that's how we're thinking about any question as well, is this is a long-term vision we have. That said, I believe in launching early and often, which is why we launched the app, as Greg said, just over a month ago, with just triathletes as the first vertical. I find it very easy to always be 1 month away from launch, because there's always more that you want to do that you haven't done yet. And so we launched before we felt like we were entirely ready to launch, but I think that's a good thing, because it forces you to it's a bit of a wake-up call. We launched, and at first our pricing was higher and people were complaining, why are you charging money to ask people questions? But then, we tweaked it and said, okay, now we're going to give the first month for free so people can get a chance to experience it. And we actually have even some other things we're working on now to go even a bit further down in that direction. So I'd say, sorry, this is
no, that's exactly that's exactly right. When you do launch, if nobody responds, you don't want vanilla. You want people to be pissed or excited.
Exactly.
When we had the magazine and people would send letters in going, I hate that article. I love that article. That's great. Passion you can deal with. You can say, oh, you think the pricing's too high? We can adapt that. But if it's crickets, what do? You're hosed, right? So it's obviously touched a nerve. Anytime you touch a nerve, you're doing the right thing. So as somebody who's done this before, the original reaction is when people go, oh my God, you're charging me to get an answer from Lucy Charles-Barclay. I'm pissed. You look at that as, okay, let's chat about this.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing you want is the silence and the crickets. That's right.
The crickets is the worst. It's the absolute worst. Okay. So Greg, this is something I've always wanted to ask you. You go in the 2004 Olympics, right? Night before, obviously nervous. More nervous or less nervous than the night before Dallas when you're in 2007, where you have to win the Dallas US Open to win what, $500,000? Which one was a better night's sleep?
It's funny. I think with some of those really, really big moments in your career, I almost was the least amount of nervousness compared to other. I get more nervous if you say, Greg, go race a couple of local guys where you're meant to win, where you when you go to a local triathlon club down in Sydney and you're world number one, if you get beaten,
you better win.
That is like almost more nerve-wracking. But when you turn up to the Olympics or when you turn up for Dallas, like Dallas that night, I remember going to bed and thinking, I think it was definitely just raw excitement that.
Uh-oh, Greg, you froze.
I think we lost Greg for a second there.
Just at the money moment.
Oh, I know.
That was the question. That was my any question.
Oh my gosh. Well, you might have to ask him again on any question.
So yeah, exactly. I'll ask him that again. So Ed, when you start out in the sport and the first time out, you go 9 and the next time you go 8:27, you must have been thinking, oh, maybe this sport's not that tough. This is I qualified for Kona my first time out.
It definitely felt tough. So I wasn't thinking it wasn't tough, but and as you know, every course is different. So Copenhagen was definitely a faster course than Lake Placid, but yeah, it did feel good to be able to go those kinds of times in my first 2 Ironman races.
You're one of those guys who doesn't mind taking risks, which I love. And so when you went to really your 3 Ironman in 1 year, your first time out, you go to Kona and you end up DNFing there. But you're the type of guy who takes something away from that. What did you take from that?
I think the thing I took away from the Kona DNF is that, it was a humbling experience. And I didn't finish because I was having a lot of hip pain during the run, but I was also just hurting and it was hot and I was in a ton of pain, and I looked at the other people passing me while I was feeling my hurt hip in the heat, just thinking, how are all these other people doing this? So I think every race is different. And, when I experienced a moment where I just didn't understand how everyone else was completing this race that I wasn't able to complete.
Well, but also weren't you have your wife was having your 4th child?
That's right. We had actually just had our 4th child. That's right. So
how you balance everything is totally crazy. So Greggy, I was doing my any question, and my any question was about the nerves before the Olympics and the nerves before the biggest payday in the history of the sport.
Yeah, I was saying to you, I think some of those biggest moments actually were probably my least nerve-wracking, I think. And I was sort of saying, doing a small race where you're meant to win is almost more nerve-wracking. But going into a race like the Olympic Games, I was coming off injury and was just happy to be there. And in Dallas, it was just, it was a moment that I just felt privileged to have. Like you hear that pressure as a privilege. It really did feel like a privilege that I was to go into an event and say, I have to win, I must win. That was what was truly special. I was so excited about that race and I remember I didn't even go study the course. I said, let's go be surprised and everything else. And I remember driving down on the bus with everybody. I caught the bus with everybody down. And I remember driving down to transition this long, long hill. And I'd measured it all on Google Earth, so I had an idea. But I'm like, when I saw this hill, I said, okay, I'm going to win today. Because I knew with a hill straight out of transition that was a couple of miles long out of the lake that I would be in the lead by that stage of the bike, that I knew no one would climb quicker than me. And so when I had that moment, I was like, okay, this is fun now. This is all fun. I know what to do. And so, yeah, I think those big moments, which I probably had 5 or 6 in my entire career that just absolutely stand out, were probably my least nerve-wracking. It's a weird phenomenon, I think, when you compared to, going to smaller races where you're expected to win.
So the other moment of your career that always sticks out to me, you're 39 years old, you're going to high V, and I'm guessing nobody was thinking Greg Bennett's gonna win this race. You're 39 years old. It's 2011, and you go out and win. I think it was $151,000 that day, something like that.
I think I made about another 25 in bonuses or something. It was a nice little day, but it was that race. I turned up very prepared, and that was the difference between age and youth. I think, I remember I went and bought myself my own Di2 electronic gearing because I figured there was 88 corners on the course, either U-turns or 90-degree corners. And I said, if I can just be a little bit quicker in and out on the gears, having the gears where my hoods are and up in the drops, I'd be so much faster. So I went and bought the electronic gearing. I wasn't with SRAM or Shimano, and they were very new. And I remember looking at the lake and it was running wild. And I remember just making sure I picked the right place in the water and backed myself with my sort of surf swimming background, understanding currents and movement of water, and position myself in the swim. And then I studied the athletes. And I remember there was one athlete from Portugal, was it? Anyway, a monster biker. He was destroying everybody. And I thought, if he comes past, you got to go. And he came past right when I was about to catch the main little group that got out of the swim. And we just went blasting through. I just remember sprinting through them up a hill at everything I had, and opening that gap. And then after that, it was like, okay, well, let's try and get a few preems. I think Ben Collins had ridden off the front and he was taking the bike preems. But I quickly caught him on the run on the first lap and then collected a few run preems. And I remember it was a balancing act. I remember having 55-second leads sort of over Hunter Kemper and some of the better runners in the field, and thinking, let's not be stupid on the first 2 laps. Let's let them have 20 seconds, but then I'll ignite the third and fourth lap. And I love that race in particular because it was one that I prepared really well for, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I remember just physically, I flew with my team. I had my mechanic, I had my bodywork people, my chiropractor. I had my full team, and I was the only athlete there that turned up with a team. And that's very empowering. I did the same with Dallas. I had my full team. I had 2 chiropractors working with me in the morning from 2 a.m. up until start. I had my chiropractor, my bike mechanic build the bike, relube the gear. I just made sure I was the one doing everything a little bit better where I could. And it pays, you got to pay for that. But I think that's the difference maker between being good and great, having those little things dialed in. And I was able to, get away with that one in 2011. And I agree with you. That was a really special one. That was a really, that was the final, it was kind of like the final really decent pat on the back. And if anybody's heard me talk, I don't mind a pat on the back, Bob. So,
no. The cherry on top of it. Yeah. I mean, you started racing when you're 15 years old. You did 500 triathlons, went over 100.
It was a long time. Yeah.
Career's unbelievable.
I just love the sport like you, Bob. I don't know how many races you've done, but you must be in the thousands now. Right now, I don't want to be swimming, biking, and running, especially with 2 little kids. It's not to say I won't in the future, but now my thing is I get to announce races. I get to have podcasts. I get to chat with you today. I mean, it's still this energy of being around the sport, working with Ed this year. He's got I love when people get into the sport and they've got this hunger and this desire and they just love being a part of it. And I'm like, this is the greatest people in the world are doing the sport. So, I'm very fortunate.
Talk a little bit about just what you've learned as a business guy. You've always been obviously a good business guy as a triathlete. what you, because this is a different level. You're talking Ed Baker and a guy who goes, oh yeah, I learned about Zwift from Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. So this is a little different type of game. What have you learned from that?
Mate, it is chalk and cheese. I bring an enthusiasm, almost like a newbie triathlete would be into the world of triathlon, right? And I'm embracing it. But I sit back in some of the meetings with the engineering design teams or with our CRM or our copyright guy. And sometimes I forget that I'm meant to be contributing because I'm just sitting back watching great minds work at 100 miles an hour. And I'm learning and just trying to take it all in. And Ed, who's with us today, in all honesty, I've never seen a brain that works at such capacity, at such a high level, that for the most time, I'm just sitting there going, wow, I'm truly in awe. And in saying that, I am learning at a rapid rate. I feel like I've had a master's degree in business in about 2 months, which would normally take a couple of years. It's been a very, very rapid learning curve. I got a long way to go. But loving it. Like I feel more alive doing this than I have for many, many years. It's absolutely fantastic.
So Ed, what, from your perspective, what have you gained from the time with Greg? Because obviously he brings a different perspective to it. He doesn't just know these athletes, he's raced them, right? When you talk about Jan Frodeno, he's raced that guy, and he's raced Javier Gomez. So, he brings a little something different to the table.
For sure. First of all, I've got to say I'm glad to hear I still have Greg fooled, thinking I'm as brilliant as he's saying I am.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see how long that lasts before he discovers I'm a fraud, right? But no, it's been incredible having Greg a part of this journey really from the beginning. And I have to say, one of the most valuable things he's brought to me personally is just his energy and passion. And it makes me, they say entrepreneurs and founders always have ups and downs. And it's true on a daily basis, their highs and their lows. And whenever I have a low, I can always talk to Greg and he helps bring me back up. And that's actually a really important role. And I think it's sometimes overlooked by people how important it is to have that person you can lean on when you need that. But I also have to say, like, I often forget Greg doesn't have the business background because he does have all of the right intuitions. And I have to remind myself, wait, this guy's been a professional triathlete his whole life. How's he know all this stuff? So he's picked it up very quickly, drinking from the fire hose, but he's drinking it very quickly.
Yeah.
So Greg, one of the things that we've both witnessed, right? You made your career with the Lifetime Fitness Series and Toyota Cup, and when those events went away, when the money went away from those events, all of a sudden, if you were a pro triathlete coming off of the Olympics or WTS Series, your option was, I got to go to 70.3. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't that draft legal to non-draft Olympic to 70.3 to Ironman. That stepping stone was gone. Yeah. And a lot of athletes didn't make it, right? They came out of the Olympics, they tried to make it, they didn't. People like Jan obviously has, and some others have. But how tough has that been, do you think, for a lot of athletes to try to adapt from Olympic right to 70.3?
Yeah, I mean, it's a much bigger leap. It is a different adaptation. But I would say that I still think the non-drafting Olympic distance is the pinnacle, the apex of our sport, that it's a real shame that we're not race directors, and I'm happy to work with any race director out there that isn't focusing more on that distance, both for amateur and for professional. I think it's the perfect, that 2-hour race. It's just the perfect mix. Anyway,
3.5 hours, by the way.
Or 2 to 3.5 hours. But my point is with it, it's one of those distances where the swim matters, the bike matters, and the run matters, right? They all, and if you're weak in any of those three, you don't win. You cannot win. And it doesn't require you to concentrate terribly much on nutrition and salt and a little bit of hydration perhaps, but honestly, it's just all out power racing, and it's a very individualized way of racing. So it's taking that out and going from the ITU format, the Olympics, where it's draft legal and you're amongst other people, and the swim really matters, and that bike power and short bursts matters. and then the ability to run a sub 30-minute 10K for the men and a sub 34-minute for the women. If you don't do that, you're out. That style of racing to going to 70.3, where if you can't push a certain, if you can't break 2 hours for the 90K bike, you're not in, right? The bike, so they're having to adapt in a massive way. There is no transition out of ITU into non-drafting Olympic into 70.3. And it's a real shame, actually, because I think that's a massive void. Look, you said at the start of the show, I think there's a lot of great positives in the sport, whether it's Macca's Super League, which I just think is phenomenal. I love the Super League. The PTO, they're picking sort of that 100K distance. Clash Endurance is picking that 100K distance. And what I mean by that is it's a, 2K swim, 80K bike, and an 18K run. So it's not too long. It's not quite the 70.3, but it's still a long way. I would have rather they pick more like a 60 kilometer total distance.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is what it is. Look, I think there's a lot of positives. I think there's a lot of great racing around. So if you're a professional athlete now and you can't make a living in this sport,
it's on you.
You shouldn't be doing this sport. It's on you, because there are avenues, and it just means you're not good enough. And I don't mean to be too harsh about that, but you got to be honest with yourself and go, well, am I treating this like a business? Am I doing everything I can to get to the right events to try and earn money? Because I believe there is money more so pouring into the sport, especially 2022 with some of the races coming on the calendar. I think I'd be very excited if I was at the top of my game right now going into 2022. I think there's an enormous chance to have a very good income coming out of next year following.
And when you look at athletes and you look at personalities, to add to any question, how much of it is, race results and how much of it is social following, just the fact that you have some athletes who aren't necessarily the best, but they've got a huge following. What matters the most?
Sure. I think we're still trying to figure that out. And we were fortunate to launch with about 30 of the top triathletes in the world. And it was a combination of all of those things. And I actually think it's nice to have the diversity of different types of triathletes on there. But when I look at for me personally, what are some of the most interesting answers I've seen on the platform? I just like the people that are thoughtful and curious and really just answer these questions, whether it's like a question about training, or it can be a question like, what's your most embarrassing story? I mean, Crowe had an answer to that question that just cracked me up, and I thought it was hilarious. So it's fun to get to know these people, not just as amazing athletes, but also as people.
Yeah. Greggy, who were your best battles with during your career? It was Macca, Crowe, back in the day.
I think depending if I was in the ITU, World Series, going for the World Series titles and stuff, I think, Chris McCormack and I had a lot of battles through the late 90s, early noughties. Crowe and I had several. Simon Whitfield, Hamish Carter and I were back and forwards a lot. They're probably, then later on Hunter Kemper, as he started to get stronger and develop in the non-drafting world. Javier Gomez and I had numerous battles, and I'd love to say it was 50-50 with him, but he definitely got the upper hand on me. Actually, he's substantially, I think it was probably 90% he won. But he really got the most out of me though. So that was fantastic. Look, it was over a long time. It's, my brain's a bit foggy now with 2 kids, remembering all the different battles, but there's a lot of war wounds on me from all those epic battles, and they're battles, but they're, at the end of the day, these are men that just try and get the best out of you, right? They've forced you to find something more in your training or the way you race. And for that, you truly appreciate each and every one of them. I think I'm better friends with all of them since retiring, because I think we all have these chips on our shoulders and these egos, and suddenly you can remove that. And I think like Jan Frodeno and I are good mates now, but I think when he was still in the start of his career and I was trying to hold on to mine, and there's this little bit of, don't get me wrong, we trained together and we hung out, but I think we're better mates now. Like now we can, I mean, he's still racing, but my ego is shifted out of the sport. So now I can just celebrate in all their victories and everything they do.
You know, what's so funny about that? I remember back in the day with Mark Allen and Dave Scott, even years after they're both retired, man, we would be interviewing and talking about all the races where Dave kicked Mark's ass in Kona. And then Mark blew up, and then this happened. Then we get to 89, and Dave's like, I don't want to talk about 89. Let's not talk about it. You're like, dude, you had 6 times you killed this guy, right?
Yeah. There's no better story in our sport.
Throw him a bone.
No better story in our sport. And I love those two. I had posters, of them on my wall as a kid. And I still think it's awesome that I get to call them my friends now, because I was such a groupie. And it's just, and I think I was even sharing with Ed and the team at Any Question about, Mark Allen is on the platform, and he came onto a meeting the other day with all of us. And I said, guys, I just want you to know that the guy that was on that Zoom call with us, Mark Allen, I had to tell, because, these are a lot of people working with us in Any Question, an amazing team, but they're not triathletes. They're
right.
experts. And I said, look, at Mark Allen, we got to celebrate this guy. I said, with Mark and Dave and that Iron War in 89, and Mark being defeated for 6 years. There you are. He got the bobbleheads. So for me, I'm still a huge fan of that whole era, I truly don't believe our sport is what it is without those two. I just feel like the only reason we have what we have is because of them. They laid the foundation. They created the media. They gave the broadcast something that accelerated it into the homes around the world, not just the US. I mean, around the entire world. That without those battles between those two, I don't know if triathlon would be what it is. I really don't.
No question. We forget there was only 3 TV networks back then.
Yeah.
And when Ironman aired in February, when everybody back east was freezing their asses off, and everybody wanted a little piece of Hawaii on their TV screen, and you had the same 2 guys every year, 82, 83, 84, 86, 87, 89, 88, 89. Every year was a recurring drama of these 2 guys, the one guy who won every year and the guy who won everything else around the world, except in Kona. So it was.
We could go all day, Bob. You and I could go all day. I'm not sure our fans or anybody else.
I love it. Ed, what have you're coming into this, obviously learning the sport from 2018 on. What is it about this sport that is so impactful? Because obviously it's changed a lot of lives.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'd have to say the first thing is the fact that it really is a never-ending journey, and you can always get better. You can always improve. I went swimming this morning at a master swim practice, and the coach was giving me feedback on my stroke. And, I'm learning how to swim as an adult I'm never going to be perfect. Even if I had started as a kid, I wouldn't be perfect. But that's just one example. But then, trying to become more aerodynamic on the bike, or nutrition, and there's just so many things you have to understand. And I think that's part of what makes it so addictive for me, is just realizing that even though I'm getting older every year, I'm still getting faster every year, because I'm just learning more about how the sport works.
I tell people all the time, all my buddies who were runners, it's like, orthopedic reality, guys, is after you're 40, 45, you're not running any faster, right? You better get into swim, bike, and run, because we can buy speed in swim and bike, right? We can buy a lot of speed, and we can hang on in the run and run less, so we don't get injured.
You can't buy enough these days, mate.
So, Greg, the change on the bike has been the biggest thing over this last number of years. Cam Wurf comes in, and all of a sudden, the core that goes from 415 in Kona to 408 to 404 on the bike, and then everybody else obviously matches that. Is that what you've seen as well? And how do people adapt to how fast you have to ride the bike to be successful?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot more information out there. I mean, when we all jumped over to non-drafting, it was like we still wore our road helmets. We just clipped on some bars onto our road bike, and it was very non-aerodynamic. And the aerodynamics and the information we're getting now is accessible to more people than it used to be. And I think more people are spending time with great bike fitting, and I think that's helping. I think the bikes themselves, the bearings, the chains and everything are also getting faster. I'd also say that a lot of people are spending more time on things like Zwift, where your bike training is becoming far more efficient. You're not going for 4-hour rides, dawdling around, going to the local, grabbing a Mars bar. It's like you're on your bike, you're staying in position, and you're training the exact skill set you need to be doing. And then the final piece I'll add is, and this is questionable, but the new bouncy shoes, these new carbon fiber shoes that you're running in, I think we're able to do more running with less damage on the body. So then, because you're not as fatigued from the running, you're able to hone in on the bike a little bit more. But that's probably a stretch, but I have been sort of thinking about that there is that. I remember having Cam Worth on, and he said, "Oh no, they're not performance enhancing, the shoes." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, no, they just, I recover faster. And I'm well,
that's performance
enhancing. And I have put I've run in the shoes, and there's no doubt they're faster. And, so I think there's that element that the running now is getting faster, but you're also recovering faster because there's not that beat up on the body of running on the pavement and everything as much. So you can do better work on the bike. But maybe it's a better one for Ed, because he's the one that's accelerated his bike out of sight. He's now breaking 2 hours in the age group 70.3s. And, that was
4 hours?
2 hours on the bike.
Oh,
right?
on the bike. Okay. Yeah. I think right around there.
Yeah. Somewhere
around. Had a lot to do with the indoor training, Ed.
Oh, it's all indoor training. I pretty much never ride outside. It's partially because
safer.
it's safer. I mean, so I had a bike accident a couple of years ago, broke a bunch of bones, and decided after that I was going to do all of my training indoors. Maybe too much to the extreme, but I find I can just get better workouts on Zwift, especially things like strength endurance workouts, or I just need to really go high power, low cadence, or any structured workouts where I don't want to be stopping at stoplights and dealing with traffic. So for me, it's been a great way to stay in shape and not consume as much time either.
Yeah, it is time efficient.
Love it.
Yeah.
Hey, boys, thank you so much for taking time. So Ed, if people want to sign up and get involved with any question, what do they do?
Sure. I think probably the easiest way is just to go to anyquestion.com, or you can search in the App Store, one word, Any Question. And actually, Android is coming out. If not today, it'll be out early next week. So we have a bunch of people on the Android wait list. So we've been excited to get Android out there.
So Ed, are you up there for people to ask you questions?
Oh yeah, people can feel free to ask me questions. They can feel free to ask Greg questions, Jan Frodeno, Lucy Charles-Barclay, and many, many others. So ask anyone questions. You can even just say, I want to ask all of the triathletes on the platform this one question, and then you can compare their answers. You can ask, what's your favorite shoe, and see, answers from 20 or 30 different people. So it's a nice way to get a lot of different opinions, even on the same question.
Love it. Hey guys, thanks so much for taking so much time. It's really a treat for me. Love what you do, Ed, and having people like you coming into our sport just helps take the sport to another level. And
well,
Greg,
thanks so much for having us, Bob. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Greggy, always a pleasure. I can chat old triathlon with you forever and ever and ever. To me, you're still the young guy to me.
Well, I'll get you on my podcast, mate, and we can definitely, then we can banter on for a good hour and a half. And Bob, I just want to say, mate, huge fan of what you're doing, and I really appreciate what you're doing for the sport. I mean, for the last, 40 plus years, mate. I don't know how long you've been sort of
a lot of years.
Competitor magazine or whatever you're doing. You're keeping this sports stories alive, and really appreciate everything you're doing, mate.
Love it. Thank you, boys. Again, Breakfast with Bob, not quite Kona edition. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. See ya.